So my mental health journey has never been positive. I was never a depressed person. I would never say was anywhere near clinically depressed, but I was never a happy person. I read an article once and it talked about type D personalities, people who not depressed, not clinical, but not happy and bubbly by any means either. And I think that was me on the lower end of the happiness level. And life was never, life turned into drudgery and work and family, and I loved my family very much, and loved everything about it. But it was never bubbly. I think that's a fair statement. And then I got on the road, and when I found living in a van, my life drastically improved. My outlook on life drastically improved. I lived for 6 years in a van, and I was much, much happier in the van than I'd ever been before, ever. Although it was going through a very traumatic time I was going through a divorce and fighting about the kids. But once all that got settled out, and we did get that settled out, and my ex-wife and I became better friends than we had ever before. We were better friends then. And we worked out our relationship and worked out our lives together and parenting our sons. And I was happier living in the van than I'd ever been. And I kept watching the people I worked with and the people I knew and came to realize that most of them weren't very happy with their lives. They were just enduring their lives, going to a job they hated every day, worried about money and just enduring life and getting through the best they could. I think that describes the vast majority of us, just enduring life, getting through it the best we can. And it certainly described me. I can only speak for myself. And then after a while, I remarried, and that was a disaster and was not very happy. And moved into a house and despised every second I spent in the house. Didn't want it out as soon as I could. Came out onto public land, got out of that marriage and started living on public land and living in my van. And that went much better. One of the few times in my life I experienced joy. Moments of being in nature brought me so much joy. It was good, really good. The only time I was really happy. And then 2011, my son took his life, one of my oldest sons, my only son. I have two sons, my oldest son took his life. And as you can imagine, that kind of puts a downer on your whole life experience in a way that few things do. Been through the divorce already, the fighting about the kids, and that was pretty horrible. But this was something at another level. And that my son took his life on May 1st of 2011. On August, I had a horrendous motorcycle accident. Demolished my elbow, demolished my wrist on my right arm. And I've always wondered if that was a suicide attempt. I'll never know. It was completely unconscious if it was. I'm not aware of it. But I had not coped well with the death of my son, and I wondered if I was finally going to cope with it in that way, and I don't know. But I was then laying flat on my back for several months in constant pain relief, pain medication. Then I was in rehab, which was very, very painful. And then one day my physical therapist told me that, and at that time, now I have, I had a fantastic doctor. At that time, that was as close as I could get to my forehead or my head, and my fingers were locked. Couldn't move any of my fingers, couldn't touch my face, my shoulder locked up from lack of use. And he told me, I don't know why you can't move. I don't see any reason. This may be permanent. And so when I drove home that night, it was just too much. I said to a higher power, as I understand a higher power, that I'm done. I'm done. You take care of this, or I'm done. I'm ending my life. I'm going to kill myself. And I meant it with everything that was in me. And the only reason I could think of to keep waking up in the morning was was my dog, and I thought I was pretty content I could find a good home for him. And within that week, a guy I just barely knew wrote me and said he was going to come and camp with me, and he did, and we camped together continuously for the next year, and that was enough. That was enough. I was not going to take my life, and as long as there's someone I can help, I should be alive. And Steve was there. Steve saved my life. Thank you. Thank the higher power that brought Steve into my life and gave me a purpose, because I would not be here otherwise. Sometime last year, I became aware that the depression decreased with time. You know, it was 100% of the time for years, and then it was half the time for a year or two, and then it was less, and it would just come on and then go away, and then it would be sometime last year I realized I was depression free, and that was, I hadn't been depressed in a very long time, and I don't know, again, you.
My story is quite different than Bob's, but that's one of the things that we find out here, is that there are a lot of us and our stories are very different from one another. I have bipolar disorder in my family. My grandmother took lithium. My dad was a violent alcoholic, and that probably had a lot to do with what was going on inside his head. And I grew up in a very violent household. And about 14 years old, I started to wake up to the fact that we weren't normal. You know, Dad wasn't normal, Mom wasn't normal, none of us kids were normal, and this was not a good thing. And my dad was in the hospital because of some alcohol-related physical problems, and that gave me the space to take an overdose at 14 that was meant to end my life. It was not a cry for help. It was, get me the F out of here. And I failed, and I decided that was really traumatic. It was really difficult to do that, and it was very scary because I was looking the end in the face at 14. And so I thought, you know, before I do this again, I'm going to try and get through life, because I can always do it again later. You know, but I can't undo it if I do it, and it's a mistake. So I started to try to work with it. And my life proceeded in a very complicated fashion. I got married on my 18th birthday and had a baby 10 months later. You know, I wasn't even smart enough to wait until I was pregnant to get married. I got married in high school. And I ended up having to try to fight for custody of my little sister at about 18 also. She was about 16. And so it was a really tough start. And then I was a teenage mom. And I was an 18-year-old married to a 19-and-a-half-year-old cop. And so you can figure the odds on that being a happy thing. But I did. I picked myself up because I had to. And the thing that kept me alive at that point was the fact that I had a son. It wasn't his fault he was here, so I darn well better take care of him, and I can't take care of him if I'm dead. And I went on for decades, you know, sort of scrabbling through life. I discovered that I was good at technology and good at working, and I could make money. So I did that I was really good at, and you know, just kept dealing with the PTSD from the bad situation at home and the bipolar disorder that I didn't know that I had, but I did back then. And just kept going. And eventually I had another kid, and about 9 months later, my gynecologist said to me, you know those headaches you keep complaining about that are coming with your period? I think it's because you're depressed. He says, and I have this friend who's a psychiatrist, and he can help you. And I went to him, and you know, he told me, hey lady, did you know that kids who have moms who are depressed grow up to be kids and adults who are depressed? And so, and did you know it works on adopted kids? It's not the genes. Now that, frankly, is rather dubious information. Don't take that home with you. But that's what he told me when I was about 21 years old. And I thought, well, darn it, I can't have my kids grow up feeling like this. I can't do that, so I better do something about this. So he prescribed me antidepressants, and I took them. And it wasn't a good thing. And periodically through the rest of my life, that kept happening to me. People would say to me, not people, doctors would say, you're depressed, and they give me antidepressants. And eventually, I became really good at my job. I had a really good career. I was making lots of money, got rid of that husband, kept the kids for a while, then had a nasty custody suit, and on and on. Not a lot of fun. And all through this, I am suicidal the whole time. You know, it's like when the kids are gone, I'm gone. But I got to stick around and do what I need to do. And about my 40s, I had a good decade where I felt less suicidal because I was having a really wonderful life with my career, and my kids were kind of grown up and getting grown up and that sort of thing. And then the last antidepressant threw me into mania. And they've been doing that to me all along on a lower level, but the doctors never caught it, and I never caught it because I was too functional. People just assumed that the only thing wrong with me was the depression. And when I got undepressed, that was a good thing, but it wasn't. I was actually becoming hypomanic. And when that happens, you cycle faster and faster and higher and lower and higher and lower. And on top of that, the bipolar drugs that work for some people to some degree don't work at all for a lot of us who get there, who get in this situation. So I ended up completely disabled. I was totally unable to work, and I'm a workaholic, so that's not good. And I went through 5 years working with a top-notch psychiatrist who finally figured out that I actually had bipolar disorder. We looked for 5 years for drugs that would even take the edge off some, that I could maybe go back to work in a grocery store as a clerk, you know, as opposed to running multi-million-dollar projects, which was what I had been doing. And we finally ended. I was so super sensitive to the drugs that a couple of them almost killed me. They weren't helping at all. I was getting worse. My physical stuff was getting worse. And finally, I ended up on the floor of my apartment for 3 days due to a reaction to a drug, where I couldn't put my head together enough to call the ambulance. And so I just crawled around on the floor for 3 days. And that was it. I called up the doctor and I said, you know, I can't do this anymore. If you have something up your sleeve that might have some reasonable possibility of getting me back to work, you tell me about it now, because I think I'm done. And she said, I don't have anything. And I came out here and I bought my van, and I designed it so I could live off the grid, so I wasn't going to have to stay in RV parks. And I trained a service dog. I don't know if you noticed her, but she's under the table. And actually, it wasn't her, it was her predecessor. But I trained a service dog to help me because there were things I couldn't do, like grocery shop, without some assistance. So she was trained to help me. And I went out on the road alone. But I had friends from my support group who would call me once a week and just talk to me, because I was pretty scared out there, and it's a huge change. It's a huge stressor to move from one house to another house for anybody. So for moving from normal housing into a van, and most of you out here have at least considered it if you haven't done it, it's amazingly stressful. And stress is not good if you have these things. And so those people kept me going, and eventually I figured it out. And when I started, I was cycling between hypomania and deep depression multiple times a week. Rapid cycling is 4 times a year. I was cycling more than 52 times a year. I was really sick. And plus I had the anxiety stuff going on. And now, I have been out here for 8 years as of last month, full time. I have not cycled once in 5 years. It doesn't mean I'm cured, it doesn't mean my anxiety is any better, it doesn't mean I'm not still disabled. But oh my goodness, is my life better? And do I have a wonderful life out here? And I never expected that level of improvement, ever. I just thought, at least I'd be out here where things are interesting and scenery's beautiful, and maybe that'll make the pain worthwhile. I gotta tell you, it's been wonderful. And I have watched other people get much better out here. But the thing is, you gotta make it through the first year, and you gotta learn how to live in this totally different environment where if you're not good at talking to people and making friends, you might get too isolated, and that by itself can trip you up and send you back to regular society where it wasn't working very well. If you identify with anything like that, and we don't care about diagnoses or labels, because frankly they're not all that accurate anyway, so who cares? But if you identify as one of us, you are one of us. And we band together and we support each other. We make sure that there's some connection out here, and we get the new people through the first year. We get them, we all are so important to get them through that first year. I've been describing serious mental illness to you, okay? And I did that so that you can see that, even someone with serious mental illness out here can get dramatically better. But you do not need to be identified as having serious mental illness to be one of us. If you're suffering from PTSD and nothing else, that's fine. If you have social anxiety and you're out here getting isolated, you're one of us. If you have autism, Asperger's syndrome, you're one of us, and we can all help each other to help each other out here. And that's what I'm here to ask you to do. So, the best thing to remember, if you remember nothing else from this talk, is nomadchapter.org.